Welcome! Today, we're diving into the essentials of lease agreements. Whether you're renting an apartment, a house, or even commercial space, understanding what a lease agreement is can save you from future headaches. A lease agreement is a legally binding contract between a landlord and a tenant. It outlines the terms and conditions under which the tenant can occupy the property. This document is crucial because it protects the rights of both parties and sets clear expectations. In the next scenes, we'll break down the key components, types, and important clauses you should know before signing any lease. A lease agreement is more than just a piece of paper. It's a formal contract that spells out the relationship between a landlord and a tenant. The lease specifies who can live in or use the property, how long the arrangement will last, and what each party is responsible for. Typically, leases are used for residential or commercial properties, and they can vary in length, from a few months to several years. The agreement ensures that both sides know their rights and obligations, reducing the risk of misunderstandings or disputes. Every lease agreement involves at least two parties, the landlord and the tenant. The landlord is the property owner or someone authorized to rent out the property. The tenant is the individual or business who rents and occupies the space. Sometimes there may be additional parties, such as property managers or guarantors, but the core relationship is always between the landlord and tenant. Understanding who is involved is the first step in grasping the full scope of a lease agreement. The main purpose of a lease agreement is to provide security and clarity for both the landlord and the tenant. It sets out the rules for using the property, the amount of rent, payment schedules, and what happens if either party breaks the agreement. By having everything in writing, both sides can refer back to the document if questions or issues arise. This helps prevent conflicts and ensures a smoother rental experience for everyone involved. A lease agreement typically contains several key elements. These include the names of the parties, a description of the property, the lease term, rent amount, payment due dates, security deposit details, and any rules or restrictions. It may also outline maintenance, responsibilities, procedures for ending the lease, and penalties for breaking the agreement. Knowing these elements helps you understand what to look for before signing. Lease agreements come in various forms, depending on the property and the needs of the parties involved. The most common types are fixed-term leases, periodic leases, and subleases. Fixed-term leases have a set start and end date, while periodic leases automatically renew after each period, such as month to month. Subleases allow the tenant to rent out the property to someone else. Each type has its own advantages and considerations. A fixed-term lease is one of the most straightforward types. It specifies a start and end date, such as a one-year lease. During this period, the tenant agrees to pay rent and follow the rules set out in the agreement. The landlord cannot change the terms or ask the tenant to leave unless there's a breach of contract. At the end of the term, both parties can decide whether to renew or move on. A periodic lease, often called a month-to-month lease, doesn't have a fixed end date. Instead, it renews automatically at the end of each period, usually monthly. Either the landlord or tenant can end the lease by giving proper notice, typically 30 days. This type of lease offers flexibility, making it a popular choice for people who may need to move on short notice. A sublease agreement allows the original tenant to rent out the property, or part of it, to another person. This can be useful if the tenant needs to move temporarily, but doesn't want to break the lease. The original tenant remains responsible to the landlord, so it's important to get the landlord's permission before subleasing. Subleases can add complexity, so clear communication is essential. Lease agreements can be used for both residential and commercial properties. Residential leases are for homes and apartments, while commercial leases are for businesses. The terms and legal protections can differ significantly. For example, commercial leases often have longer terms and fewer consumer protections, so it's important to read these agreements carefully and seek legal advice if needed. Every lease agreement should include certain essential clauses. These cover the rent amount, payment schedule, security deposit, maintenance responsibilities, and rules about pets or guests. Other important clauses might address late fees, renewal options, and procedures for resolving disputes. Understanding these clauses helps you know what you're agreeing to and what your rights are. One of the most important parts of any lease is the rent clause. This section specifies how much rent is due, when it must be paid, and what forms of payment are accepted. It may also outline penalties for late payments or bounced checks. Clear payment terms help avoid confusion and ensure both parties are on the same page. Most leases require a security deposit, which is a sum of money held by the landlord to cover potential damages or unpaid rent. The lease should state the deposit amount, how it will be held, and the conditions for its return. Laws about security deposits can vary, so it's important to understand your local regulations. A good lease agreement will clearly state who is responsible for maintaining the property. This includes repairs, regular upkeep, and handling emergencies. Usually, landlords handle major repairs, while tenants are responsible for minor maintenance and keeping the property clean. Clear maintenance terms help prevent disputes and keep the property in good condition. Leases often include rules about how the property can be used. These might cover things like noise levels, smoking, pet ownership, and the number of guests allowed. Following these rules is important, as breaking them can lead to penalties or even eviction. Always read this section carefully to avoid surprises later on. The lease should explain what happens when the term ends. Some leases automatically renew, while others require a new agreement. The document should also outline how either party can terminate the lease early, including notice periods and any penalties. Understanding these terms helps you plan ahead and avoid unexpected costs. Disagreements can happen, so most leases include a dispute resolution clause. This section explains how conflicts will be handled, such as through mediation, arbitration, or court. Knowing the process in advance can save time and money if issues arise during the lease term. Lease agreements must comply with local, state, and federal laws. These laws protect both landlords and tenants, covering issues like discrimination, safety standards, and eviction procedures. It's important to make sure your lease follows all legal requirements to avoid problems down the road. Once both parties agree on the terms, the lease must be signed. This makes the agreement legally binding. Each party should receive a copy of the signed lease for their records. Never sign a lease without reading it thoroughly and making sure you understand every section. Sometimes, circumstances change and you may need to modify the lease. Any changes should be made in writing and signed by both parties. Verbal agreements are not legally binding and can lead to misunderstandings. Always update the lease document to reflect any new terms or agreements. Breaking a lease means ending the agreement before the term is up. This can have serious consequences, such as losing your security deposit or owing additional rent. Some leases include early termination clauses that explain the process and any penalties. Always check your lease before making this decision. If a tenant breaks the lease or fails to pay rent, the landlord may begin the eviction process. This is a legal procedure that must follow specific steps, such as giving notice and going to court if necessary. Tenants have rights during eviction, so it's important to understand the process and seek help if needed. When a lease term ends, both parties can choose to renew the agreement. This might involve signing a new lease or extending the current one. Renewal terms can include changes to rent, rules, or other conditions. Always review the new terms before agreeing to renew. A lease assignment allows the tenant to transfer their rights and responsibilities to another person. This is different from subleasing because the new tenant takes over the lease entirely. Assignments usually require the landlord's approval and a written agreement. It's important to follow the correct process to avoid legal issues. Many people make mistakes when signing a lease, such as not reading the document carefully, overlooking important clauses, or failing to get changes in writing. These mistakes can lead to disputes or financial loss. Always take your time, ask questions, and make sure you understand every part of the lease before signing. Don't be afraid to negotiate the terms of your lease. You can discuss rent, maintenance, responsibilities, or even the length of the lease. Negotiation is a normal part of the process, and both parties should feel comfortable reaching an agreement that works for everyone. Lease agreements often contain legal jargon that can be confusing. Terms like lessee, lessor, premises, and default have specific meanings. Take the time to look up any unfamiliar words or ask for clarification. Understanding the language of your lease is key to protecting your interests. While the terms lease and rental agreement are often used interchangeably, they have key differences. A lease typically refers to a longer-term contract, such as 1 year, while a rental agreement is usually month to month. Understanding the distinction helps you choose the right option for your needs. Always insist on a written lease agreement. Verbal agreements are difficult to enforce and can lead to misunderstandings. A written document provides clear evidence of the terms and protects both parties if a dispute arises. Make sure every important detail is included in writing. In today's digital age, many leases are signed electronically. Digital lease agreements are just as legally binding as paper ones, provided they meet legal requirements. Always use secure platforms and keep digital copies for your records. There are many lease agreement templates available online. These can be a helpful starting point, but it's important to customize the template to fit your specific situation. Make sure all relevant details are included and consider having a legal professional review the document. Sometimes, a property manager acts on behalf of the landlord. The property manager handles tasks like collecting rent, arranging repairs, and communicating with tenants. If a property manager is involved, their contact information and responsibilities should be clearly stated in the lease. Some leases require a guarantor or cosigner, especially if the tenant has limited credit history. A guarantor agrees to pay the rent if the tenant cannot. This provides extra security for the landlord and can help tenants qualify for a lease they might not otherwise get. Some lease agreements require tenants to have renter's insurance. This insurance protects the tenant's personal property and can cover liability for accidents. The lease should specify any insurance requirements and what coverage is needed. The lease should state who is responsible for paying utilities like water, electricity, and internet. Sometimes, the landlord covers certain utilities while tenants pay for others. Clear terms about utilities help avoid confusion and unexpected bills. A move-in inspection documents the property's condition before the tenant moves in. A move-out inspection does the same when the tenant leaves. These inspections help determine if any damage has occurred and whether the security deposit will be returned. Always keep a copy of the inspection reports. If you want to make changes to the property, such as painting walls or installing shelves, the lease should state whether this is allowed. Some leases require landlord approval for any alterations. Always get permission in writing to avoid problems when you move out. The lease should explain when and how the landlord can enter the property. Usually, landlords must give advance notice unless there's an emergency. This protects the tenant's privacy while allowing the landlord to perform necessary inspections or repairs. If either party fails to meet their obligations, the lease should outline what happens next. This might include late fees, repair costs, or even eviction. Knowing the consequences of default helps both sides understand the importance of following the agreement. Lease agreements are subject to state and local laws, which can affect things like rent control, security deposits, and eviction procedures. Always check the laws in your area to make sure your lease is compliant. Local regulations can override some terms in the lease. Fair housing laws protect tenants from discrimination based on race, religion, gender, disability, and other factors. Lease agreements must comply with these laws. If you believe you've been discriminated against, there are legal resources available to help. For older properties, landlords may be required to disclose the presence of lead paint or other hazards. The lease should include any required disclosures to keep tenants informed and safe. Always read these sections carefully, especially if you have children or health concerns. When it's time to move out, the lease should explain what steps to take. This might include cleaning the property, returning keys, and scheduling a final inspection. Following these procedures helps ensure you get your security deposit back and leave on good terms. It's important to keep copies of your lease agreement, payment receipts, and any communication with your landlord. Good record keeping can help resolve disputes and provide proof if legal issues arise. Store your documents in a safe place, whether physical or digital. To wrap up, a lease agreement is a vital document that protects both landlords and tenants. It sets out the rules, responsibilities, and rights for everyone involved. Always read your lease carefully, ask questions, and make sure you understand every part before signing. With the right knowledge, you can enter into a lease agreement confidently and enjoy a smooth rental experience.